Hello everybody and welcome back to LMM, and if you're enjoying what you're seeing on the channel at the moment, how about giving this video a like and maybe subscribing to the channel to help us grow, and perhaps even check out our Patreon. Today we're here at the NEC for the National Festival of Railway Modelling with our modular layout. This is the NCMA's modular, of which I built that bit over there, Loz is building that bit there, Nick's built that bit there, Dave and Becca have done that, the Cole Hill's built that, and Tag's done that bit. We've all come together and brought it to this absolutely massive show. It is the biggest show in the UK. There are over 60 layouts here in attendance. So whilst we play with that, we're going to take you on a tour around and hopefully see, if not all of them, most of the layouts here at this amazing show. So that, we're going to start operating on this once they finished doing the museum. Anyway, on with the show.
And it makes sense to start off having a closer look at our modular layout. This was the first time that we'd ever set it up in this orientation and had all of the modules lined up into one long layout. And it made sense for me to be based here so that I could meet all of you lovely people and hand out cards and badges to everybody who recognised me. This double O gauge modular layout is based somewhere in the UK and represents an entirely fictitious heritage railway during a gala event. This basically means that we can run whatever we fancy with whatever we fancy, as long as it kind of fits that heritage theme. And with 12 of us in attendance, that led to a frankly outrageous amount of rolling stock, ranging from the little known to the well known and everything in between, which meant that everybody had the chance to feel trains and locomotives no matter what they modelled. Trains left the traverser and ran round one of Lucy's curves passing the circus, before heading across Tagsport and onto the Cole Heath station, and then through Dave and Becca's farm towards the passing loop. Tag had based his module on Ingro on the Keighley and Worth Valley Railway and featured locomotives and trains shunting back and forth in the yard, and a selection of vehicles that represented the LMM vehicle fleet, which I really liked. Our passing loop was built by Nick and represented one of the many small passing loops along the Wisbech and Upwell tramway, where farmers could have a wagon dropped off whilst it was loaded to be collected at some later date. This was connected to Loz's museum module, which had its own station and a big museum building full of locomotives that weren't going to be running. It also boasted a short demonstration line where locomotives could shuttle back and forth, and was complex enough to function as an Inglebrook shunting puzzle so that Loz can use this layout when it's not part of the modular. And then this was connected to my own module, the building of which was documented here on the channel, so if you haven't seen that, go check that out now. This then went on to one of Lucy's curves and swung back into the far traverser. We hadn't had it set up like this before, but it was quite nice having the hills of Lucy's module with the hills of my own. All this meant that we required 6 operators, 1 for each traverser, 1 for each half of the railway, and 1 for each of the 2 yards. And of course, I wasn't particularly available because I was so busy meeting you guys and having a good natter about trains and everything else that I feature on the channel, as well as an update with the full-sized locomotives. As you'd expect, we fielded some of our most prestigious and expensive locomotives and trains, but I wanted to show that you don't need to have the most modern and expensive releases to be able to run models at a show, and I took great delight in being able to field some of my older models like this Evening Star from the early 80s that most people would overlook and say isn't detailed or good enough to appear at an exhibition. And it was really popular, with lots of people looking at it and remembering one that they'd had in the years gone past. And frankly, on a layout this size, you don't really notice the lack of detail when compared to a modern USA tank and its train as this thing trundles past. It's doing exactly what it was meant to do, hauling trains and making people happy, and having the opportunity to do just that with it, I thought was absolutely fantastic. And hopefully it will bring more people into the hobby as they realise that you can make do with second-hand locomotives and still get a great deal of joy from them. And as well as running models of a variety of ages, we were also mixing it up a bit more when it came to the actual traction that was running on the layout, from things like this blue and grey DMU to the infamous Pacer, which actually ran surprisingly well, and this model is well known for being quite a dud, to things like mainline diesels as Class 20s made their way up and down the line with a variety of different trains, looking perfectly at home in the preservation railway setting, to things which are a bit more fun and really not often seen on an exhibition layout, like the Hornby Pocket Rocket, this time in the guise of the 06. The layout was over 10.5 metres long, which gave our locomotives the rare opportunity to really stretch their wheels. For some of our members, this would be the single longest journey their locomotives had ever ever made in their ownership, and it looked so cool seeing the little trains winding their way through the landscape that we had created. And although we fielded a mighty fleet of some 55 locomotives, not everything that ran on the layout was ours, because our friend Cole over at KR Models asked if we wanted to do some product testing, and when we said yes, he presented us with this, one of the 2 painted samples of the long-awaited Southern Railway's leader. This model here is one of 2 working painted samples that KR Models have, and to have the opportunity to run this, the one DC suitable leader, alongside our own fleet on our modular railway was a huge, great honour, and one that we couldn't quite believe that we were getting to do, and we were extremely grateful for the trust that KR Models had extended towards us in allowing us to do so. The locomotive generated a huge amount of attention, and rightly so. This model has been a long time coming, but it was more than just that. Whilst the engine has gone out and visited other model railways and been sent off to various members of the model railway press for test and review, running with us was a little bit different. Not only was this the biggest show that it had ever been on a layout at, but this was also the longest operating stint that this model had ever done at a show. It ran on our layout the whole day, and I'm really pleased to be able to report that the thing behaved flawlessly. It ran well at a variety of speeds, it pulls well, and it gave us absolutely no problems whatsoever, and we are all so very excited for the models to land in the UK and get our hands on our own versions. It was a real privilege to be able to put the leader through its paces in public, and KR Models weren't done with us yet. On day 2, they took the leader back to go on the stand and asked us to test out the DHP1 painted sample. Like the leader, this was the biggest show it had ever run on a public layout before, and also the longest that it had ever run for. And like the leader, it's also brilliant. And speaking of brilliant was this GT3 by KR Models in the fictitious limited edition BR Black livery, which Carl gave us to run for the entire weekend. Now, I've reviewed one of these models previously and I absolutely loved it, and this one was no different. We decided to pair it with the vintage Graham Farish coaches that I unboxed on a video not that long ago, so we had a brand new locomotive hauling 40-year-old coaches on their first ever train, and I thought that was kind of poetic and beautiful. The GT3 proved to be absolutely perfect and didn't put a foot wrong the entire weekend, and was one of the locomotives that saw the most action on the track. Now, KR Models had been exceptionally kind to us, but they weren't done yet, because they let us run their factory sample of Bellerophon. This is the only one in the world, so to be able to run it was truly a great honour, and Loz soon put it to work shunting back and forth on his demonstration line. The thing we really love is the eccentric valve gear on the outside, which really moves as the model goes along. It's going to be an absolutely stunning model, and we cannot wait for this thing to make it into mainstream production. This also commanded a huge audience, with the public coming and gawping at it, and the big question that we got asked from most people was, how on earth did you get your hands on that? To which we just smiled sweetly and sent them in the direction of the KR model stands. Admittedly, it was slightly weird to have this so obviously unfinished model running alongside production models of different locomotives. However, it was truly exciting to have a factory sample and actually run it. So often these models just get paraded around and held on a stand. To put it on a layout and actually get it to do what it's meant to do and haul tiny trains was a genuinely rewarding and exciting experience. Now, this model shows a lot of promise, and I think the finished thing is going to be amazing. This factory sample, however, is showing some issues. We kept finding that it would stall, and it wasn't the smoothest of runner. However, we know that these are things that KR are aware of, and that they're going to be changed for the production model, and so I'm really very much looking forward to it. Something else that we had was this absolutely stunning sound-fitted Class 31, given to us alongside this absolutely incredible graffiti train by our friends over at TMC. And if you want to find out more about their graffiti service, check out the link in the video description to go to their website. We highly recommend it because the quality of the graffiti that they traditionally do on modern wagons is absolutely outstanding. I don't model modern image, but it makes me want to because they're just that good. And we were so blown away by what the guys had done on these coaches for us. And these coaches remained on the layout running for the entire weekend and generated a huge amount of attention from the public, who thought it was quite fun and had never seen something like this before. TMC themselves said they had never graffitied coaches before, which means these are the first of a never before seen product, which was genuinely really exciting. And I never thought I would see the NCMA and the LMM logo graffitied on the side of a miniature train. So this was very much a new experience for all of us involved. And of course, the greatest of thanks to TMC for approaching us and making this happen. Those coaches were amongst the highlight of the entire show for the club. Another highlight for me was amongst seeing the layouts and chatting to you guys, I actually got to have a turn operating.
Cool. Nick, do you want to take over then? I'll get cover. Right, are you ready? Set to about 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
It has got those coaches with the logos on it. It's just quite wonderful. You should have those, isn't it? Got yours. Right. Thank you, and thank you to whoever put on my 48. I'm doing a scale split, don't care about it. You may want to stop there for a while. This is going to be it for the rest of the trip. It's this speed, it's how fast a 48 goes.
They're both sleepers, but my passenger gets off and walks to nearby hotel while it waits.
And yes, this little Ruston 48 was a repaint to represent my full-size one, Sir William McAlpine. So I was very happy to see it out on the layout and insisted that it would travel at a scale speed.
No, that's Ross. So I think he's got it. It's at the. There's a Foxwood, isn't it? It's not where it is. Is that?
As much as I enjoyed being able to operate the layout and put out weird and wonderful trains like the Little American Plymouth, which looked absolutely superb snaking its way along the layout, there was one thing I enjoyed more, and that was getting to meet all of you wonderful guys who came up and said hello. It really made my day, so thank you to all of you who did. Moving on to the layouts. And first up was Bear Creek Junction in HO, a fictitious location somewhere in Colorado where the logging and mining industries have taken hold. This was visually stunning, with an amazing trestle bridge and steel girder bridge making their way throughout the layout. Most of the locomotives were fitted with sound as well for that extra layer of immersion. And having been to the Durango and Silverton Railway, this conjured up memories of being right there, and I absolutely loved it.
build a bridge.
It's still going.
Coming back to Blighty and 00 was Branston and Hayington, an LNER branch line which served the communities of Hayington Village and Branston, set in the autumn of 1943. And as an LNER man, I love little LNER branch lines. I love the rolling stock and the locomotives, and this layout just really appealed to me. As well as dedicated layouts and traders, there were also a large number of societies like the Glyn Valley Tramway Trust, a relatively newcomer on the preservation scene, hoping to raise the profile of the railway they're hoping to rebuild, and that had several of the iconic tank engines running around a rather large SM32 railway around a second-hand bookstore. This was great viewing, and as well as battery electric, they were also running some live steam, although every time we came past, they'd just finished running the steam engine, so you're going to have to make do with seeing the battery running round. Keeping with a narrow gauge theme, and possibly my favourite layout in the entire show, was Campbell's Quarry, an exercise in moving sand from one side of a layout to the other, with its rust and drag liners and face shovel, and the pit of sand in front of it. All the operators did was load the sand up in the fully working drag liner and face shovel, tip it into the hopper into the waiting simplex and its skip wagon, and then move it to another part of the board. As somebody who appreciates machines, and particularly big tracked machines, I was fascinated by this, and frankly could have spent the entire show watching them load and unload. This is just fun. And this really sums up how I feel model railways should be. They should be there for enjoyment and fun. And this is something that if I had, I would just sit and operate for hours and hours and hours. And once the wagon was full, the locomotive could head off to the other side of the layout to then offload the sand and repeat the process. I just thought this was wonderful. And all of the excavators work on cables like their full-sized counterparts. There's no fancy modern electronics in there. No sir, it's all old school, and that I love even more. Keeping with the narrow gauge theme was the White Oak Railway, a fictional railway set somewhere in the backwaters of Kent with a dockyard on the Thames estuary, which meant there was a wide variety of varied goods trundling back and forth, and I'm always really partial to a dockyard scene. I don't know what it is, but I love this. I think it looks so good. Moving to N gauge was the Royal Albert Bridge, with the main feature being the bridge that the layout is named after. This is not intended to be an exact replica, just a representation of the area due to the constraints of the baseboard size that was supplied to the guys who built this as part of the Great Model Railway Challenge on Channel 5. Several of the major manufacturers were in attendance, like Pico showing off their TT120 range of track and accessories. Keeping the track width the same, but changing the scale to 009 and perhaps representing the future of model railways was Bond Lane, with a screen behind the layout that went through a variety of different weather conditions of which the layout mimicked. It went from daylight, sunset, into storms, and was a complete visual feast. It gave you that whole extra layer of immersion, and I wonder if this will catch on and make its way onto other layouts to really bring them to life. Jumping up a scale to S7, which is like a super fine O gauge, is Oakhurst Town. Now, I've seen this before, but this is a new, regenerated and condensed version of an older layout, which captures the spirit of its predecessor whilst faithfully recreating a nearly forgotten backwater in the 1880s. I love seeing models of this time period because it's so rarely done. Normally we're in the mid-1900s or later than that, so seeing stuff from the 1800s is always a treat. As somebody who really enjoys TT gauge, I was a big fan of Foxbury. It's so nice to see a proper layout modelled in this gauge. It represents a fictional quiet town somewhere in the Cotswolds in 1955, which meant there was lots of little Great Western locomotives moving about. I really like Cato's N-gauge track. It's a wonderful click-together system, which means you can take it absolutely anywhere, set it up, and have a layout which holds itself together, which means basically you can run trains anywhere. What I like even more though is these little dioramas that they set up. And I really want to get involved in making some of these tiny little bits of railways that all interconnect together like a tiny modular. I just think they're really cool and really good fun, and that's what the hobby should be about.
Have a go if you want. Yeah. So, that hand you want on the controller, throttle, yeah, come in. Come on the button.
I'm getting slightly freaked out by this.
What's the fun thing?
Drop it down here. Yeah.
Keeping with N-gauge is Scarlington, which is operated by a friend of mine. The most obvious feature of this is the huge bridge that spans the centre of the layout. Because it's N-gauge, you really get a sense of scale and size of this massive, imposing structure. The layout is set in the 70s and 80s, and you get lots of period trains of the times like HSDs and Deltics charging around with full-length trains. And with the track gauge still not changing but the scale jumping up a size, was Small Bridge Junction in 009, which is an idyllic imaginary small junction connecting a branch line to a wood warehouse. Keeping the scale the same but changing the track gauge was Folly Lane in 00, which is based somewhere in the southern region, Wessex, Sussex or Kent, but loosely based upon Housemere with an aggregate yard next to the station and working level crossings and signals. It's the little touches that really make a layout, and this, being the southern region, had third rail electrification, and seeing that modelled was a really nice touch. Next up was the yard in O, which featured both standard and narrow gauge and an incredible overhead working gantry, which I thought was absolutely awesome. Whilst there were a lot of traders at the show, I don't think anybody managed to bring more locomotives than TMC. It was a frankly incredible display of models from a variety of manufacturers, as well as a good collection of their exclusive graffitied wagons, which really have to be seen to be believed, and perhaps one of the most expansive and varied collection of second-hand stock at the entire show. Next up in P4 gauge, which is the same scale as 00, but with the track set to the correct distance apart, was Port Chullin, which is based on the real line to Caer Lochalsh that for its last few miles hugs the side of Loch Carron and contains a series of short embankments and bridges over the small inlets. Having recently been up to Scotland, this took me straight back up there.
Is that a custom built good shed?
Sorry, what?
Your good shed, was that custom?
Yes, that's scratch.
Well, that's a good sign.
Yeah.
Staying in the same gauge was Laysdown, and as a light railway enthusiast, I absolutely loved this because this was based on the Sheppey Light Railway and absolutely captured the scene of a little light railway in the interwar years. It models Laysdown, the terminus of the line, and has recently been refreshed to bring the quality of the modelling even higher. And not moving away from P4 gauge was Pwllheli, situated in the northwest corner of Wales on the Llyn Peninsula. Pwllheli is the northern terminus of the Cambrian Coast Railway and is modelled in the period between 2000 and 2012, prior to ERTMS coming into operation. As you would expect, many of the major manufacturers were in attendance, including our friends over at KR Models, who had many models on display, including the mock-up of the hotly anticipated Big Bertha and limited edition GT3s like the one that we were running on the Modular. There were samples of the 4DD and running samples of the Shay and the Fell. The Shay particularly I am really excited for, but look at the motion as it's going along. I just think that's super cool. There are also examples of the Torpedo and Bell when it wasn't running our layout, as were the Hunslet Shunter and the DHP1 when it wasn't on our layout, and a fictitious BR Black livery of the leader, which actually looks super smart. Returning to layouts was Bournemouth West in 00 fine scale, a massive layout with full-length trains running out of the station of which the layout is named. It was a flurry of activity with trains coming in, freight being marshalled, and it's always exciting to see full-length trains running in 00. And there was so much amazing detail to take in, and I love it when a layout is more than just a station. You have a good run before the station to really see a full-length train get up to speed and run through the landscape. And as well as that, a load of the locomotives were sound fitted just for that extra immersion of this massive station complex.
Assuming you're controlling the one closest to you. Swapping to you then.
The only exhibitor's layout to be built out of Hornby's new TT120 gauge was Holcombe Beach, a joint project between BRM and Market Deeping Model Railway Club. This was one of the first layouts on the circuit to be built in this new scale. It's really interesting to see what can be done with TT, although as the range is still in its infancy, that was the main drawback of this layout, as there just wasn't the variety of rolling stock.
Their tracks and their trains aren't good up the high speed like ours are. Strange to think that. You would think that being as they're sort of, being a much bigger country, the cities much so apart, you'd think they would be geared up.
A layout that wasn't limited by rolling stock was Allaby in O gauge, representing a fictional part of the railway system in northern Cumbria, somewhere between 1985 and 1992. It is over 40 foot long and arranged in U format, with 2 fiddle yards, which means there's always a flurry of activity with full-length trains moving between the two and shunting going on in the foreground. It's always a joy to watch an O gauge layout of this size. There's a real sense of weight and purpose to the stock that moves across the layout. The stand with the most stunning model was probably the Talaclin with this incredible 1:1 scale Douglas, complete with LMM badge on the front buffer beam, and of course I couldn't resist sticking my head in and having a good look all over the thing.
You're nowhere near.
I've done this before.
Have you?
Yes.
Have you done this before?
I've done this before.
Returning to layouts and double O gauge was Southgate Park, situated somewhere on the southwestern section of the southern region and is somewhere in the outer suburbs of southwest London during the Network South East days, featuring a variety of locomotive hauled DMU and EMU stock. And I do love Network South Eastern livery, and seeing long trains wind their way through the layout was a real delight. Up next was the aptly named A Nice Layout in N, which had been built solely to display and run the owner's large collection of locomotives and trains. It's modelled somewhere loosely on the Great Central Railway in the 60s, but runs stock all the way up to the preservation era, basically whatever the owner wants to run at the time. And it was a hive of activity and so much fun to watch interesting and different trains like this one, full of EMU stock being moved along, and rare locomotives like a GT3 running along, which I've not seen before in N gauge.
Talking about you, mate. You haven't seen that, that's so bad, isn't it? Yeah. Something that's strong with BT3. nice layout, exactly. Oval things, weren't they?
One of the most impressive layouts in attendance was Whiteacres in 00, which is built on an impressive 4 levels. It's designed to represent a fictitious place somewhere in Staffordshire set in the modern day, so there's lots of recognisable traction like Class 66s. There are multiple railways on the multiple levels, one of which is a busy junction where trains frequently have to come to a stand at the working signals to wait for the clear road. What this means as a viewer is lots of trains frequently get queued up, and then there is a flurry of movement as everything gets the green light, and there is a mass migration of trains across the board. Something I really enjoyed was how many of the manufacturers had brought a layout with them to demonstrate their own product, like this diorama on the Oxford Rail stand with one of their locos trundling up and down. Staying with 00 was Barry Handy, which is located somewhere on the Atlantic west coast of Scotland and based on the town of Mallaig, which is the terminus of the West Highland extension. It's set somewhere between the 70s and 80s, and as I was recently up in the very town, I can really see the similarities between the layout and its inspiration. I have seen Overlord before at other shows, but it never fails to impress with the sheer size and scale of it. It's loosely based on Southampton and Portsmouth docks during the preparation for Operation Overlord, of which the layout takes its name, which you know better as the D-Day landings. As well as being an absolutely incredible model with so much detail and so much to look at, it also serves as a stark reminder of just what a massive undertaking this was, and it helps generations that weren't part of it to grasp an idea of how colossal this operation was.
Through the war, and then my youngest sister, she's kept it now with army stuff. I took a photograph of it and I started doing all the research on it. That photograph.
One of the best things about the show was that it was open to all kinds of railway modelling, and this was one of the most popular railways at the entire show. When I sent my team out to film the event, this is the layout that I got the most video back from. Everybody was absolutely fascinated by it, and for good reason. These Lego trains look really, really good. You can tell exactly what the model is, and it's built out of Lego, which is just absolutely fantastic. And even better, the majority of the models on the layout aren't glued together. They're proper Lego, so they can be disassembled and used for something else. It's just, this is laughably good fun, and I thought it was amazing. What was particularly impressive was the massive bridge that spanned one half of the layout. This was brilliant. This was brilliant, and it just made me happy. And of course, my favourite manufacturer was there, Helgen, because they did this.
These made from my Ruskin 48. These are models of my one, and that is pretty damn exciting, I'll be honest. That's the most exciting thing ever.
There was also a sample of the eagerly anticipated U1. Heading back to layout, and we had one of the entries from the Great Model Railway Challenge. This one is set in an entirely fictional location somewhere in the Swiss Alps and features a double-track mainline and a steeply gradiented branch line working its way up to a rocket launch site, which looks very much like something out of Thunderbirds. The other thing that was really cool was a working funicular railway built out of an old Hornby four-wheel coach, and that I really liked. It's the first time I've seen one of those coaches actually looking quite good.
Also, it's got a radar dish that moves. I don't know how they do it. If I was under the bridge,
From the same team and from the final of the TV series was all the fun of the fair, and I have never seen anything like this model before, based on an amusement park with a railway working its way through it. And of course, these are just a tourist attraction, not really based on anything, with the typically horrendous looking steam outline locomotives at the forefront. Since its appearance on TV, this has been extensively rebuilt to bring it up to the standard that is suitable for an exhibition, and I really like it. It's so cool to see something completely different. The second LEGO layout was called the Playout, and the idea behind this was to give kids something they could do and get hands-on at a show where typically they wouldn't be able to touch any of the models. It's a really good way to get kids interested in modelling and always a hit with families. The variation in traders was quite extensive, from people selling model railway stuff to Saddle Tanks books, which are children's stories based on narrow gauge steam engines. Perhaps the youngest person to have built a layout and have it at a show was the chap behind Ford and Hill. It's so good to have a teenager taking an interest in the hobby and having their own layout at the show. Heading away from the UK and in HO was Santa Maria, a fictional layout set on the Italian and Swiss border, based on a proposal which never happened. As an English enthusiast, I'm always excited to see continental stock because it's so different to the stuff that I'm used to. Returning to the UK and heading towards Wales was a layout with a name I'm not even going to try to pronounce in EM gauge, which is the same scale as 00 but with the track set to a more correct gauge. The layout represents a fictional line coming off from the Cambrian Railway to serve a lead mine around 1910 to 1912, when the Cambrian, which was never particularly well off, would have been at its most successful. I love these pre-grouping layouts. The locomotives and stock are so different to the kind of things that we're used to. With perhaps the worst scenic section of any of the operating railways in attendance was the 7 1/4 inch gauge there and backlight railway, who asked if I wanted to go.
This is my favourite kind of model exhibition, the ones where I get to go on. Oh, that's full power. If I blast the horn a lot, I wonder if I can get the attention of the guys at our end. What's really fun is when you've got something this loud and everybody looks. I've never had more of a fear of not falling off the rails. even when I've been out on the main line, like, the fear of derailing here in front of all these people is palpable. I am maybe a child. That's brilliant. That's so much fun. I do.
Having been forcibly removed from the locomotive, I headed back into the show and had a look at Lisworth Bay in Engage, which represents a southern branch line coming towards the end of its life, with one of the main lines being lifted, reducing it to just a single track branch. Today, nothing is left, and the line is now a cycle path. Staying with Engage was Burdock, a completely fictional village supposedly along the Golden Valley line between Swindon and Shroud. It's set in the summer of 1964, just a few months before most of the stations along the line would have been closed, and features a variety of locomotives and rolling stock.
They got a bell.
Gonna cause a flood.
It soon became quite clear that the guys operating the layout were having an awful lot of fun and not taking the whole prototypical modelling thing that seriously. They put out things like the Hogwarts Express and some of the weirdest loads I've ever seen on a train. Returning to 00 was Weaver Hill, a modern image 4-track main line with overhead catenary, which has been on the exhibition circuit for 10 years now. I always like a line like this that doesn't have any stations, so you get a sense of speed as the trains go rushing past you. It's no secret that I'm not normally a fan of sound-fitted steam locos because I don't think they ever sound right, but the ones by ESU with their lock sound range actually sounded pretty good. In 3mm scale was Stedham Mill, a fictional layout based on plans from the 1860 for the LBSCR to extend its line. It features a junction where third rail electrified southern stock meets a branch line that still hasn't been electrified, so relies on steam and DMU power. Up the line is set at some point during the Great War somewhere in France and represents a transfer yard where goods could be brought in by rail and then distributed and taken out by the small internal combustion locomotives to the front or artillery batteries. Everything is either scratch or kit built, with a lot of 3D printed components being used. Returning to 00 fine scale was Temple Combe Lower on the Somerset and Dorset Joint Railway. This is modelled during the railway's last decade. A notable operation is, in order to access the station, trains had to reverse out, being led by a pilot locomotive before they could carry on with their journey. train tech make cool stuff, working signals, departure boards, and working destination boards for the side of coaches. Next up was fellow YouTuber Jenny Kirk with two of her layouts, whatever the Welsh is for Potato Mountain in 009 gauge, and Four Seasons, which is a really clever modelling project showing how you can model different seasons, turning what would otherwise be a boring circle of track into something quite interesting. And then there was Tramlink in 00, designed to show you how much you could fit into a tiny space. Moving up a scale to O was Kirkwood West Rising, part of the Ex-Great Northern lines in Yorkshire. Being a fan of the eastern region, I really loved all of the sound-fitted locomotives that grace this layout. It really gives you that extra level of immersion as they trundle through the layout. This line was all closed in the beaching cuts, so it's great to be able to see it recreated and appreciate what once was. As Gagemaster are best known for their controllers, it made sense for their stand to show off their controllers, with a flurry of locomotives and trains running around many ovals of track. Operating with a bit more of a sedate pace was Bixdale in 00 gauge. Situated somewhere in the Forest of Dean, Bixdale is a small station terminus serving a coal mine and a lumber yard, where you'll see a locomotive and one or maybe two coaches coming into the station.
Doesn't need a run round. You can get rid of that and get it changed. So I thought you were going to take it out. No, I gave them something to fill, that's all.
Another layout that I didn't know how to pronounce its name was this one in EM gauge. This represented a branch line towards the end of its life. Beaching has come in and axed the passenger service, and now only a very limited goods service remains, working in a slowly closing and overgrown yard.
Make the loads on the wagons and move it so I can have full empty. We've got really good movement. I don't think we go straight in the tracks. Yeah. We do get issues with things.
Moving to the 1930s and O gauge was Kirtley Bridge, modelling a growing Yorkshire village in the 1930s as the Bradford Corporation begins to build a reservoir at the head of a valley, meaning an increase in freight traffic to help supply the building. There was lots of lovely detail on this one, and I particularly liked the little Fowler as the yard shunter with its own shed. Of all the manufacturers, Rapido had one of the biggest stands, and this was good because they had an awful lot to show off, including the O1 in the blue livery as Bramble. This one was initially put on Facebook as a what if rejected livery, but public outcry demanded that this model should be made, and it's lovely to actually see it in the flesh. There was also a good number of unpainted samples running around showing upcoming models that are going to be coming out from the company in the not too distant future, as well as old favourites running around as well. There were also some painted samples of upcoming models, including the Metropolitan tank, the Y7, which I am so excited for, and the Manning Wardle in its factory sample guise, which is going to look super smart, and the one I want most out of everything, the Port of Par twins. I cannot believe they're making them, and I want one of these so much. In fact, I want the pair of them because they're awesome. Returning to the layouts in 00 gauge was Fairford Depot, designed to allow traction from the 1980s up to the present day and not based on any real location. It features third rail and overhead line to allow a variety of stock to operate on the layout, and most of the locomotives are sound fitted, which means you get that wonderful start-up noise as locomotives are prepared, ready for their day service in the yard. I've always had a thing for dockside layouts, and Fairport Wharf is no exception. I've always just loved these kinds of layout. This one is an entirely fictional location somewhere on the south coast. There's essentially two layouts in one. Incorporated in the cluster of points and sidings is a small shunting puzzle that keeps the operator amused during long operating stints. With possibly one of the best names out of all of the layouts in attendance, Shelfie is era neutral, meaning the operator can run what they want, from British Railway steam up to sectorisation and privatisation, and even leave the country altogether and model America. The idea behind it was to show that you can have a fun operating layout in the minimum amount of space, and that's something with my own tiny layout skull I'm totally on board with. I frequently get asked where my rolling road that pops up in various videos when I'm mucking around with model railway locomotives came from, and the answer is it came from these guys, DCC Concepts, and I highly recommend it. It's been such a useful tool for servicing and working out what's wrong with locomotives. They make a wide range of tools and other useful model railway gubbins, and this little layout with DMU shuttling back and forth was actually quite entertaining to watch. Jumping back up to O gauge was Wolf Low, a small terminus station located somewhere in the Staffordshire moorlands. The layout is set in the LMS pre-grouping days, but ambiguous to just what part it is, to allow the layout to accommodate Midland, LNWR and North Staffordshire stock. The most impressive thing about the whole layout is a little narrow gauge railway that comes out of the mine and then fully automatically tips its load into the awaiting wagons below. I love little things like this on layouts when they actually can move a load from one part to another, and it's just brilliant. It makes it real. It's actually doing something and moving something. Aberdeen Kirkhill Traction and Rolling Stock Depot is a fictitious 00 gauge layout set in a real location. It's assumed that the site of the existing Clay Hills depot had been sold and the depot relocated to a site a few miles to the south. Actually, this was a scheme that was considered by British Railway during the 1980s. What's really cool is that this layout works on a sequence which is taken from a working timetable from the winter of 1987 and 1988. The idea is to show how much work goes on behind the scenes and how many movements there would be in a typical day and night at a traction and rolling stock depot in the middle of the 80s. It's a little bit strange to have a garden railway indoors, but that's precisely what Dixon Green is. It's a 16mm layout, operating both live steam and battery-powered locomotives, and a return trip on this railway is a full 80 metres. Now, I love live steam, and I love the sound a little steam engine makes as it's trundling along, and it's great to be able to bring this to the show and explore so many aspects of model railways. There's lots of industry around the layout, with things being loaded and offloaded and moved about. It was a flurry of activity with so many locomotives moving, we didn't really know where to look. Dropping right down to the opposite end of the scale was this wonderful micro layout in 009. I love how tiny it is and how impossibly tight that curve is that the locomotive manages to throw itself round. I don't think you could get a locomotive going round in a loop in a much smaller space. Carrying on with N gauge was Brinklow, which is based on Brinklow Station, part of the Trent Valley line between Rugby and Stafford. This featured an impressively long run into the station and was made up of a 4-track main line, which meant you would get an amazing flurry of activity when you had all 4 lines with trains running on them. Staying with N but shifting to modern day was Yorkshire Pennines, representing a fictional part of the East Coast Main Line, where a supposed preserved railway has an adjoining platform. The most interesting thing about this layout was it was entirely computer controlled, and whilst the operators could take manual operation from it, the computer was happy to operate the layout and run everything entirely on its own for the whole show. Minories in EM is an imagined extension of Moorgate further into the City of London near Aldgate. It's set in the late 1960s and early 1970s, before electrification of the suburban lines from King's Cross to St Pancras. The concept was to show that a busy station terminus could be modelled in a very limited space. Also in attendance were our friends over at L-Cut Creative, who make a frankly dazzling array of modular kits like these stations, a signal box complete with lever frame, and a whole host of other things, many of which have made it onto the modular. Like, look at all these different doors you can have. Heading back to the layouts, we go to America for Putnam in HO. Originally inspired by the Putnam branch of the New York and Central Railroad, it draws inspiration from the built-up and rural areas along the line of which the real railroad took. It's set in the late 1940s to the mid-1950s and features a variety of steam and early diesel from the New York Central and Pennsylvania railroads, and features a decent freight yard where wagons can be marshalled and stored ready for their next trip. Returning back to the UK was the Wharton Court Estate Railway in 016.5. It depicts a narrow gauge estate railway operating in the early 1960s, with the main traffic being crushed rock from a quarry and stone blocks to an architecture stoneware factory. The layout was originally built in the 1970s and was one of two layouts exhibited during the inaugural meeting of the 7 Mil Narrow Gauge Association. During the past 8 years, it has been substantially rebuilt and extended following a long time in storage. Jumping abroad again, we end up at Wolfstadt in HO. This is a layout 10 years in the making. The layout is purely for standing back and watching the trains pass by in an alpine scene. It's not based on anything particular, just to enjoy that lovely scenery, although it's set from 2010 up to present day and features Austrian, Swiss, Italian, Slovakian and German rolling stock, which for me is a real treat to see all these different designs of trains against a stunning background.
It is.
Moving away from the exhibition hall and going to the toilets, Rapido had been up to their old tricks and put up these risque posters, which I really like. I think they're really fun, I think they're tongue-in-cheek, and I think it's really good advertising because I look at it and it makes me chuckle. Good on you, Rapido. That was fun. And having washed and dried our hands and re-entered the exhibition hall, we came across Fredstone Lane in Engage. This is a modern image layout, but the team's emphasis is on entertaining exhibition visitors rather than rivet counters, and so whilst there is considerable nod towards authenticity, a liberal approach to a constant supply of stable and visiting trains from different regions and eras is encouraged, and that's what I like. They're there to put on a good show with a flurry of movement with trains coming left and right, and that's what keeps people entertained. Something that I really liked was the test tracks, so for people who have bought themselves a new or second-hand model at the show, they can take it to this, put it on and make sure it's all tickety-boo before they take it home, and I think that's a wonderful thing. Kilnet Road Shed is a small portable 00 gauge layout designed to show how DCC sound can be achieved. It's modelled in the BR Blue days because, in the words of the builder, those ones sound better. And finally, there was Diddy Deeping, a mix of 00 and 009 set in a quarry scene, with lots of lovely little Easter eggs hidden around, including a UFO. There was plenty going on with lots of locomotives and trains moving around, and some really strange loads on some wagons. It was at this point that I managed to get back to the modular to have a go on the controls. However, as soon as I did, this happened.
Well, that brings us to the end of this video here at the NEC. The show is now over, so these are the last trains making their way along our modular layout. It's been such an honour to be here and be part of this show. It's been absolutely incredible. So thank you all very much for watching. Thank you to each and every one of you who came along and had a look at what we were doing here and came and said hello, supported us at the show. It's been magical. So if you have enjoyed this, have a click in somewhere over there for other videos we've done this time last year and other kind of railway stuff, or maybe the building of this. And with that, that's it. Show's over. This is the last train. Thank you all very much, and a massive thank you to BRM for inviting us along and to be part of this show. It has been absolutely incredible and we have loved it. So, see you guys next time. Ta-ra.